In the exciting world of automotive history, some cars were absolute legends that faded away way too soon. Just imagine cruising in a slick, turbocharged coupe or a futuristic hatchback that had the potential to change the game but vanished without a trace. What made them so special, and why did they disappear from the roads? Was it a matter of poor marketing, or did they simply get lost in a sea of competition? Stick around as we uncover the hidden gems of the 1980s that deserved a second chance and left fans craving for more. Number 5. The Audi 5000. Now this one's got a pretty cool backstory. Before Audi blew everyone's minds with their Quattro all-wheel drive system in the 80s, they were making front-wheel drive cars, and the Audi 5000 was a big deal during that time. What the US called the Audi 5000 was actually known as the Audi 100 pretty much everywhere else. The first version of this car came out in 1969 under the company Auto Union, and the 100 actually stood for the horsepower that it packed. This little sedan and coupe combo sold like crazy, over 800,000 units in its first generation, which lasted until 1977. And Audi was already messing around with four-wheel drive prototypes back then, but nothing serious hit the streets. Now jump forward to 1976 and the second generation Audi 100, or the C2, was born. And this time Audi included a 5-cylinder engine, which was a masterstroke. Then in 1979, the 200 model was phased out from Audi's models. Consider it as the 100 model that was already classy but had a new engine and stuffed into that produced 168 horsepower. Seems like a lot of power for a car that was just around 2,500 pounds. But the Audi 5000 was taken off of the market mainly due to a big scandal in the late 1980s regarding phantom acceleration. Drivers complained that when they drove their 5000s, the cars accelerated on their own, thus causing accidents. And it developed a big media issue. This heavily damaged Audi's image and company revenue suffered. Due to the negative media coverage and expensive litigation costs, the brand was forced to abandon the 5000 name altogether. They then renamed their sedans Audi 100 and Audi A6 early 90s to popularize and concentrate on reconstructing their image. Thus, even though the 5000 model was not originally a defective car, the scandal of sudden acceleration became the final stroke for the model's fate. Number 4. The Chevy Nova. Now it started as an affordable, practical option and ended up as one of the most iconic muscle cars of its time. Chevy first designed the Nova in 1960 to compete with Ford's compact cars. By 1962, the first Chevy 2 Nova hit the market, offering 3 series and 5 styles, so right from the start, buyers had options. One of the most popular models was the 400 series convertible, which sold for just $2,475 back then. Adjusted for inflation, that is under $20,000 in today's money. But the real power came in 1964 when Chevy added a V8 engine to the Nova lineup. With 195 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque, this little car could move. It was light too, which made it even faster on the road. And things got even more exciting in 1965 when Chevy introduced a 327 V8 engine with 300 horsepower. Now the Nova was ready to go head-to-head with muscle car legends like the GTO and Mustang. By 1969, the Nova had fully embraced its muscle car persona, ditching the Chevy 2 name and going straight for the big leagues with a longer wheelbase and new engine options. The top SS model boasted a 375 horsepower 396 engine, though only a few of these were sold. Unfortunately, stricter fuel and emission regulations in the 1970s eventually led to the decline of the Nova's muscle car status. By the time the last one rolled off the line in 1978, it wasn't the powerhouse that it once was. But even today, the Nova remains a beloved classic, especially among collectors. Just a quick timeout, you guys. Before we move on to the rest of the video, could we please ask you for a small favor? If you have enjoyed the content so far, could you please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel? Over 98% of viewers who watch our videos do so without subscribing. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it is a really huge help to us in growing our small channel, so thank you. Number 3, the Dodge Rampage. Now this one was a quirky little car or truck hybrid that had its moment in the early 80s. You know how in the late 70s people were panicking about the fuel crisis and cars were becoming smaller? Well, to cash in on the trend, Dodge came up with the Rampage, a compact truck using the Chrysler L platform. It wasn't very big or particularly all that heavy, and it had a 2.2-liter four-cylinder engine that produced just 84 horses. Yeah, this car was a slouch, but it sure was economical, with an estimated fuel economy of 21 and 29 miles per gallon on the city and the highway. However, as an underpowered vehicle, the Rampage wasn't a pushover. In fact, it had considerable power. It had a fair amount of carrying capacity at 1,145 pounds, 105 pounds less than the Chevrolet El Camino. Now, it was not exactly easy to market to the right audience, so let's just say it struggled with that. In 1982, it sold 17,636 units, which was not poor for a first model year rush. But in 1983, even with a new model, the Rampage 2.2, it only sold slightly over 8,000 units. The US automaker tried to revamp it with a sportier look in 1984, but this wasn't enough to stop the decline. As a result, they only managed to sell 11,732 units that year. The brand manufactured a total of only 37,401 Rampages throughout its existence. But here's the thing though, it wasn't just the Rampage that had issues. The whole car-based pickup segment was already on its way to the scrap heap when the Rampage came along. The first true offspring of this segment, the Ford Ranchero, had already met its demise in 1979. Even the mighty El Camino was seeing its numbers slide, with production dropping year after year until the eventual demise in 1987. People just weren't into these smaller, fuel-efficient trucks anymore, especially as gas prices started to drop again in the 80s. By 1984, full-size trucks like the Ford F-Series were taking over, and folks wanted bigger, more powerful rides. The Rampage just couldn't compete in that new landscape, and that's why it is such a rare sight today. It is a cool piece of automotive history though, especially if you're into the underdogs of the car world. Number 2, the Ford EXP. It's the early 80s and Ford is riding high with the success of its Escort, which everyone loves for its fuel efficiency. Ford decides to take things up a notch and introduces the EXP in 1981, a two-seater version of the Escort with a sportier vibe. Sounds cool, right? Well, it definitely had its charm, but there were some hiccups along the way. First off, the EXP was Ford's first two-seater since the Thunderbird. It had this slick, aerodynamic design with a low profile, bulging headlights, and that iconic bubble-back rear window. It shared the same 1.6-liter engine as the Escort, putting out 70 horsepower. But here's where things went a little sideways. It was 200 pounds heavier than the Escort. So, despite looking sporty, it was actually slower, taking over 14 seconds to hit 60 miles per hour. Ford had high hopes, thinking that they would sell 200,000 EXPs in the first year, but they only moved about half of that number. Consumers just weren't biting, especially since the EXP had a higher price tag than the Escort, despite offering similar performance. Ford didn't give up easily though. In 1984, they introduced a turbocharged version with 120 horsepower, which shaved the 0 to 60 time down to around 9 seconds. They even added a spoiler and some sporty trim to give it extra flair, but sadly it still wasn't enough to save the EXP, and by 1988, it was discontinued. The funny part, while it faded from the streets, it found a second life on the drag strip. Bob Glidden turned an EXP into a drag racing machine thanks to its lightweight and aerodynamic design. But for most people, the EXP just didn't have enough power to match its flashy look, and that's why it never became a collector's gem. And finally, at number 1, the Nissan Pulsar NX. Now this car has a rather colorful history and was first introduced in 1978 by Nissan as a subcompact car to the Nissan Cherry model. The Pulsar grew to be an enormous hit in Japan and in various markets globally, which was offered in different names and makes such as the Datsun Pulsar or even the Nissan Sunny. The first generation of Pulsar is known as N10. It was produced between 1978 and 1982. And they came in so many types: a 3 or 5-door hatchback, a sedan, van, and even a sporty fastback. But as they rightly said, the real fun was with the second generation, marketed as the N12 since 1982. This version was a bit more angular and was kind of fun with international guest players. Although Nissan initially created the Pulsar in Italy with the assistance of Alfa Romeo, they called it the Alfa Arna. The Pulsar NX, available from 1983 to 1986, came with two engine options: a 1.5-liter turbocharged or 1.6-liter naturally aspirated. It had a lot of similarities with another car model, namely the Nissan Sentra. While Nissan produced a Pulsar EXA convertible in 1985, the model was limited to a mere 100 units. They even gave it a special soft top to keep the rain and heat out. Pretty rare, right? So while the Pulsar NX didn't stay in the spotlight for too long, it definitely made its mark as a versatile, fun little car. And that concludes part 2 of our series of 1980s cars that should have never been canceled. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already seen it, and if you happen to be into cop cars, then check out this video that covers the top cop cars of the 70s, or even this video, which covers the fastest cop cars in the world in 2024. Thanks for watching, everyone.